Everyone knows that mining affects the land. This is why we need to understand that the land means different things to different people. Traditional territory is a term that refers to areas of land that First Nations people have always used and occupied. Here's a map that shows the territories of various First Nation people. As you can see, traditional territories cover the whole province. Reserves are different. First Nation reserves are small parcels of land created by the federal government to separate and restrict First Nations people. These reserve lands are just 1/3 of 1% of the land in BC. They are a fraction of the size of traditional territories, and they're usually located on the least desirable land. BC is different from much of the rest of Canada in that most of the First Nations here didn't sign treaties with the government, which makes most of BC unceded territory. Unceded territory means that First Nations people never signed away rights to their traditional territory, not through a treaty or an agreement or even a battle or a war. Instead, what happened is the government of the day created borders and laws as if no one lived there. First Nations never agreed to have their land taken over, and that's why it's called unceded territory. Here's an analogy. Imagine the President of the United States declares that Canada is the 51st state. Then the US government arrives here and sets up courts, police, schools, and other institutions as if the systems and practices and economies we had in place just didn't exist. But there is no war, no treaty, no agreement giving the US authority or right to do so. This is what happened with the First Nations in Canada, especially in British Columbia. For centuries, mining and resource development laws and practices have proceeded in BC on unceded territory without consideration of the systems, practices, or preferences of First Nations communities for whom these lands are traditional territory, the place they've always lived.